Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. We have a very interesting show for you. We have gone back to our debate format, and I'll explain that to you. The topic tonight is abortion, pro and con. And we have Lucy LaRiche, who's the Vice President of Vermont Public Policy for Planned Parenthood, and Mary Beersworth, from the Executive Director from Vermont Right to Life. Each of these ladies will have 20 minutes to talk and answer questions for you, and then they will come back individually and have 10 minutes for a rebuttal session. So we're starting off this evening with Mary Beersworth. Mary, welcome.
Nice to see you, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad you two are here. This is very exciting. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and what we don't know about you already?
I'm just an ordinary Vermonter. So I was born in Vermont and grew up here and lived here. And my husband and I moved to near the Jay Peak ski area to raise our 4 children. And they're all married. They've all graduated from college. They all have children. So we feel that we've moved to a new phase of our lives. And in 1996, I was offered the job as Executive Director and Lobbyist for the Vermont Right to Life Committee, which is a pro-life organization. And I want to make sure that your listeners understand that it goes beyond life in the womb to life as a newborn with potential disabilities and at threat for infanticide, to the elderly and the terminally ill at the end of their lives, that they are not hastened to their end.
Yes, I noticed that on your website. I actually didn't know about the end-of-life part of what you do. Why is it called a committee? Is that because of the National Right to Life group?
The Vermont Right to Life Committee actually had its roots in 1971, and it was called the Voice of the Unborn. And it was chapters had sprung up spontaneously across the state to fight the new push for legalized abortion. And in 1974, of course, this is now post-Roe v. Wade, that Voice of the Unborn group decided to accept being the chapter affiliate of the National Right to Life Committee, and then adopted the new name, the Vermont Right to Life Committee.
I see, great. So could you tell us a little bit about, we're talking specifically abortion, but I'm going to have you come back to talk about the end of life. But anyway, could you talk about your position on abortion and that of the Right to Life Committee?
Yes. It's a uniquely important organization. There are lots and lots of pro-life groups, and at this point there's everything you can imagine, including gay and lesbians for life, black communities for life, always the religious organizations, you know, the Catholics for Life, and the every denomination has a pro-life group at this point. But Vermont Right to Life is unique because it's not based on the Bible or based on any particular ideology, but based on our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, which guaranteed, and the first right, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is where right to life comes from in our name. And it's based on medicine and science, which determined in the mid-1800s that life began at conception. This is not new science, and it's not pseudoscience. This is solid medical and scientific research that tells us that at the moment of conception, a tiny human being has begun. It is not a blueprint for who you will be, it is you. So at that moment, that magical moment where the egg from the father, not a human life, egg from the mother, not a human life, sperm from the father, not a human life, combined, and at that moment of conception, fertilization, it is a unique human being that has never been before, will never be again. Your blood type is determined, your sex is determined, your hair color, eye color, potential IQ, all kinds of things. Your own unique blood type and your own fingerprints will soon develop.
And yet, Mary, the current status of the unborn child, it doesn't have the status of being alive. Like if it was killed, the mother was killed in a car accident, they don't look to the fetus as part of the charge of manslaughter or whatever it is.
Well, you're correct about Vermont, but 38, 39 other states do recognize that
really?
life. Yes, they do, and the federal government recognizes. I remember, if you remember the Lacey and Connor Peterson case in California, where the husband killed his wife and his unborn child, and 2 bodies washed up on shore, and he was charged with 2 murders. Here in Vermont, Patricia Blair of Bennington lost her unborn twins to
I remember that.
impaired driver. And those were viable twins, very much wanted. It was her choice to have them. And the headline in the newspaper the next day was, "There were no fatalities as a result of the crash, and those two beautiful babies died."
Wow.
And their pictures are online. Look up the Bennington babies. You can find out what a heartbreak for
Now,
the family.
The federal Roe versus Wade, the federal law recognizes the fetus as...
Yes, the
So how
Lacey
can
and
we,
Connor
how
Peterson
can
law.
we not recognize it if the federal law... Oh, you're smiling.
Well,
If the
and it's
federal
very
law-
narrow. When they pass a law like the Lacey and Connor Peterson law, it exempts abortion. So they're just trying to make sure that we are, and this is moving in this direction on all
Right.
levels. I mean, Health and Human Services is just declared, the Health and Human Services Department has just declared that from the moment of conception, they will be protecting human life, developing procedures and protocols that include life in the womb. If anyone's looking at current headlines, there was a infertility clinic that lost a number of embryos that were in the freezer and the process all broke down. And there's emotion involved. There's apologies going out. There's probably going to be lawsuits. Why? Because that's an embryo. It's a human being. These are people desperate to become parents. And they understand how hard it was to get those embryos created. And they are considered their children. I mean, there's court cases going on forward about those children.
I read in your website, which, by the way, is a very good website, so I would encourage people to look. Could you give the website?
Sure. It's very simple. It's the Vermont Right to Life Committee. You can look it up that way, or VRLC.
Okay, great. Because they gave a listing of what happens week to week, and I doubt if you have it memorized, but maybe you could talk a little bit
the most
about how
fascinating
it
thing.
grows.
Yes, and thank you for this opportunity, Pat, because it's just a marvel. It really is. And please don't take my word for it. Please look up National Geographic Life in the Womb. There's all kinds of scientific, now that we have ultrasounds that are four-dimensional, that you can even see the baby's face and start to know, that looks like grandpa, or that looks like grandma. So it's fascinating, the journey that is involved with this little embryo who makes its own way up into implanting into the uterus, creates an environment for itself, his or herself, attaches the umbilical cord to the uterus, starts sending out the hormones that will end a woman's regular cycle, starts producing the changes to a woman's breast to make them milk-producing breasts. All that happens before a woman can even know they're pregnant. And the most exciting thing that happens is at 21 days, that little heart has begun to beat. So before most women know they are pregnant, there's a little beating heart. And that's important because the rest of the development can't occur without that heart that is
circulating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it's just rapid fire development. It's so exciting to watch. The little feet at 10 weeks are a fascinating tool that the pro-life movement uses, and children love to see how little their feet were. You'll see those little feet everywhere at fair booths and things.
Yeah, there's jewelry. I've seen.
To promote life. And so the journey through life is fascinating, but by 7 months, all that's left for that child to do is develop the lungs a little further. At 23 weeks, they can routinely save babies' lives. 23 weeks, just a little over halfway through the pregnancy. And yet, sadly, abortion in Vermont and in most of the states in the United States is legal throughout pregnancy. Some states have moved to restrict, but the overall United States policy, we join with just 7 countries, including North Korea, Vietnam, and China, in allowing elective abortion after 20 weeks.
And that's when they can feel pain, correct, at 20 weeks?
Yes. And I would elaborate on that a little bit. If they're going to do surgery in the womb, which is amazing, I mean, they can repair spina bifida, they can do some things to fix a little heart problem while they're in the womb, but every time they give anesthesia to the unborn child because they know that child can feel pain.
I had my girlfriend, I don't want to waste too much of the 20 minutes, girlfriend gave birth to a baby, and it was so tiny, they filled the doctor's glove with water and used that for the bed for the baby. It was amazing. I don't know how old.
During a surgery?
No, this was, she prematurely gave birth.
Oh, is that right?
And it was so tiny that just pounds, and healthy child now maybe 18, 19 years old. And
these
but
stories are more and more common. Isn't that interesting?
Well, they're doing so many amazing things.
They are.
You talked about Roe versus Wade. It legalized abortion. Did it do many restrictions, or did they leave the restrictions to the states?
Well,
or
Roe
open the
versus
door and
Wade,
let them do whatever.
there were two cases that were handed down, which very few people realize. It was Roe versus Wade, which dealt with the first trimester, but in combination, Doe v. Bolton dealt with the second and third trimester. And they basically allowed for abortion in the first two trimesters, and in the third trimester, you could restrict for a reason. But in 1983, a Senate Judiciary Committee investigated the state of abortion in the United States of America, and they said there were virtually no obstacles to a woman getting an abortion throughout the entire 9 months of a woman's pregnancy.
Right. Well, what would you like to see happen? And we were just talking before the show, there hasn't been too many bills introduced, if any, of the last year or two. What would you like to see happen legislatively? Because it's fairly open here in Vermont.
Yes, Vermont has not a single restriction on the practice of abortion. In fact, non-physicians routinely do abortions, nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, physician assistants. It's largely at Planned Parenthood, who you'll be hearing from next. They do about 90% of the abortions performed in the state. They do not need to notify parents. That would be a really compelling. And we actually passed that bill in the House. Not sure if you were there as a legislator.
Parental notification?
Yes, a parental notification.
I would have voted yes if I was there.
Well, it was in 2001, and we had a vigorous debate. So essential to me that parents begin to understand. And in the House, it was passed, and then it was deadlocked in the Senate, never moved. Most states in the United States either have a parental notification law or a parental consent law. Essentially, the clinic would have to notify one parent of a minor daughter. It compels me, but the State House right now is hostile to any such thing, so there's not a bill in there now. Yeah. But that would be a prime number one, what we'd like to see. And here's one of the biggest reasons why. Our young girls are in trouble. And when they're pregnant, they've never been under more pressure. From a boyfriend who doesn't want to pay child support or tell his parents, from perhaps an abusive relative, or from even someone who's using them in human trafficking. And the number one thing that will happen when parents are notified is, who's the father of this baby, right? So we can't just keep letting our young girls bear this burden, make this choice, which they usually come out saying, I felt I had no choice. They feel pressured. And carrying that alone, keeping secrets from their parents, and in fact, possibly returning to the abuse they may be suffering.
Well, I think the bill that if I remember correctly, and this had some exceptions if it was incense. You could go to court and you could do it around the parents if that's where the neglect was happening.
And it was a probate court judge, which those judges can meet you in McDonald's and have a cup of coffee and talk to you about your situation. Yes. But the main thing would be to ferret out, abuse.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want them going back to the same situation. So I was curious, Mary, your organization is a lobbying advocacy group. Do you provide education through, pamphlets and help people maybe develop programs to get to younger people to talk about alternatives or adoption, if that's...
Yes. So what we do by far and away is only a very narrow part of keeping a presence in the State House. I'm the lobbyist. I make sure I make I'm there. We have a lobby day. We do some things to keep the issue before people. The compelling issue of human life. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. We're talking about transgender lives matter, gay lives matter, and the whole range. But at some point, unborn lives matter. They're part of the human family. An unborn child, as we just talked about with fetal development, is a child already living on this planet. So that's a little piece of what we do. But by far and away, we have chapters across the state. They're all volunteer. All of our money is donated by pro-life Vermonters who care. And we do more education than anything else. We have an educational trust fund. The last 3 years, we've run flyer projects, 220,000 flyers in newspapers, just telling the pro-life story. We always promote adoption, and in fact, part of our lobbying efforts, we were very active in changing the adoption laws to make for more open adoptions and lots of choices for young women thinking of giving up their babies, instead of we're taking your baby and you don't know anything from here on in. So we advocate that, and we try to do, it's not our piece, contraception is not part of our mission. It's life. Our mission is life. It's when that life begins. So, but abstinence education is nearly non-existent here in Vermont, and yet what we see for troubled young people who have too early on engaged in sexual activity is tragic.
Yeah, I'm surprised myself when I hear stories about how young, fortunately, those of us my age didn't have to worry about that so much when we were growing up.
There's a lot of pressure on young girls and young boys to engage in sexual
So we have
activity.
just a couple of minutes left, Mary. I wanted to ask you, what's your response when you hear the abortion is a reflection of a woman's right to choose? What's your response to that?
Well, I can tell you as someone who in college said I'm pro-choice, you know, and then as it developed and I began to learn a little at a time, not with my first child because I thought he was just a total miracle, but when you have another one, you start to go, wow, they're all special. You know, so that started to open my heart up. But the real kicker for me was when I started talking to women who have had abortions and the tremendous sadness that covers them. And invariably, they tell these stories that are so tragic, really. Circumstances forcing them, forcing them into what was supposed to be a choice, and they invariably end up telling me, I just felt I had no choice. So it makes my heart very heavy that that's the choice we have said to women. We're telling them they need to participate in the economic life of our country. They have to sacrifice a baby to do that. I think we can do better for women, and I think we can promote life in the womb. People think we want to just ban all abortions. We'd really like a culture of life where women wouldn't think of having one, men wouldn't think of asking them to, and abortionists are out of business.
We have 2 minutes left, and you had a gentleman speaking at one of your rallies, Ryan Baumberger. And he wrote a book, Not Equal, Civil Rights Gone Wrong. Could you talk a little bit about that message? Because it was an interesting read.
He's a beautiful guy. You can find him on our website. He's at theradiancefoundation.org. He is a young man who his mother was raped. He is a Black American, and he is crusading for life. He's a joyful man. He was adopted into a family of 3 natural-born children and 10 adopted.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, beautiful
God
family.
bless that family.
He's so grateful for his life. He's grateful to his mother for giving him up. And he's very concerned about the future of this country on life. He spoke very powerfully of how in New York City, more Black lives are aborted than born. He called it abortion is systemic racism because it tends to be that the Black community is targeted for abortion.
I've actually never heard that. That
was what his message was to us at the State House when he came to speak, was that abortion is systemic racism. It more powerfully negatively impacts the Black community and minority communities of every stripe. And every color, and just it's poverty. It's poverty. So what are we doing? What are we doing?
Wow. Mayor, we have about a minute left. Would you like to say anything else that we've sort of missed?
I appreciate this opportunity, but it's such a big subject, and it's a subject that hasn't gone away in 40 years. Roe v. Wade was supposed to settle it. It's one of the top 10 issues in every election and every campaign. So I encourage people, use the internet, break down those stereotypes, see if we can't find a place where we can begin to agree. Could it be banning abortions after an unborn child feels pain? Could it be creating systems that help women, really help them through a crisis pregnancy?
Give them the support they need.
And those resources are out there. Are those resources reaching them? And then we have to reach to men, because men pressure women. It benefits men in a tremendous way to have that situation go away for them, and we need to talk to men about pressuring women into a decision.
Well, thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.
For listening. I'm going to turn the show over to Ben Kinsley, who's the co-producer here with his guest, and we'll continue the debate. Thank you.
Welcome back to the second segment of our show tonight. We're talking with Lucy Lurish, who is the president of Vermont Public Policy for the Vermont Planned Parenthood chapter. So Lucy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, basically the format of tonight's debate, as Pat had mentioned at the beginning, both people are going to get a chance to talk for 20 minutes about their organizations, the policy positions of your organizations as they relate to abortion, reproductive rights, and all of that, those types of issues. So with that, Lucy, do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself? We ask all of our guests to talk about themselves and share who they are to kind of get to know you a little bit.
Sure. So I grew up in Wolcott on a chicken farm raised by French-Canadian parents. And I went away to school. I taught at Arizona State University, which is where I got my graduate degree. I came back and remained in academia for a bit, and then moved into real estate development. I developed special needs housing, housing for people with severe and persistent mental illness, housing for low-income families, and the elderly, and so on. From there, I was recruited to run for the legislature, where I served for 8 years, 4 years on the healthcare committee, and 4 years in a leadership position. I was the House Majority Leader. And then I served in the Shumlin administration. I was his deputy secretary at the Commerce Agency, and then became secretary of the Commerce Agency at the end of his term. And from there, I moved on to working in public policy for Planned Parenthood Northern New England.
So wow, you've got a lot of feathers in your cap. You've done a lot of different things. That's very cool. And what drew you to having worked in state government for probably the last 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, easily.
What kind of drew you to Planned Parenthood as like your next step?
Planned Parenthood has always been really important to me. I was a patient of Planned Parenthood as a young woman, and I have seen firsthand the remarkable difference that they have made in people's life, offering compassionate, non-judgmental care for people. But at the heart of it, I felt like it was really important to support Planned Parenthood because they are out there fighting for women's rights. A right to an abortion is a very important personal choice that people make, and it can really affect their entire lives. Whether or not they have that choice can really affect their entire lives. And that's, as a woman, that was really important to me, to stand up for something that I really believed in, and for people to have agency over their own lives.
Cool. And everyone kind of knows, like, Planned Parenthood, provides contraceptives and, in most cases abortions and other services. What kind of other services does Planned Parenthood provide other than, like, the two that everyone knows about?
Right. Well, I think Planned Parenthood is best known for abortions, even though for Planned Parenthood Northern New England, that is probably one of the smallest slices of our patient activity. About 6% of our patients come to us looking for abortions. The majority of our work is done in contraceptive counseling, 37%, but we also do a lot of cancer screening. And we do testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections. And we do trans care and other kinds of counseling. And we also see a lot of patients for symptom visits. We are basically a primary health care organization. We do primary care primarily around reproductive and sexual health.
And what's the mix between Medicaid and Medicare patients and kind of general public? Because you do kind of have your patient base tends to be fairly weighted, correct?
Yeah, so about 16 of our patients, about 69% are low income. 47% of our patients are Medicaid patients. Medicare is marginal because we have Planned Parenthood serves mostly our client base. Our patient base is mostly people of reproductive age, and Medicare is it's a program for older Americans.
And even with cancer screenings, you don't carry over some of that a little bit, or is it just basically primarily
it's
younger?
Cervical cancer primarily and
Gotcha.
breast cancer. So we do breast cancer screenings and cervical cancer screenings primarily.
Cool. So we'll dive right into it. What is Planned Parenthood of Northern New England's position on abortion and why?
Yeah, well, quite simply, we believe that abortion should remain safe and legal. It's been legal for 45 years now, and for very good reason. Women, when faced with an unwanted pregnancy, will go to extreme measures to terminate the pregnancy, to the point where they could even cause harm to themselves inadvertently, because the stress on them would be too much to bear if they had to carry a pregnancy to term. So we believe that a safe place for women to receive abortion care, if it comes to that, is really important.
So you want to make sure that these procedures are done in a clinic where it's safe, where the risk of complications or risk of infection is much lower than it could be in a facility that wasn't as high of a standard. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what level of support is there for abortion as an issue in Vermont in terms of public policy?
Yeah, Vermonters are very supportive of a woman's right to choose. About the Pew Foundation did a poll about in 2014 that showed 70%, and it was broken down. They did a national poll, and it was broken down by state. It showed 70% of Vermonters support a woman's right to choose, compared to 26% of Vermonters who felt very strongly that a woman should not have a right to choose, and 4% were undecided.
So there's not a whole lot of ambiguity on this issue. Most people are either for it or against it.
Yeah, most people in Vermont are really for it. It's more popular than, it's perceived more positively and is more popular than Congress, than the Democratic Party, than the Republican Party. It is what we would call in politics a mandate.
Right. Well, so, and this is interesting, I guess, because it kind of gets into the nuance of how people feel about the issue. So that you're looking specifically at whether or not people support the option, your right to have access to an abortion, right?
Yes.
Are the numbers any different for people who say that even though they support the right, they personally may not exercise their ability to have an abortion procedure?
I think that many of the 70% would probably choose not to have an abortion, but 70% believe that women should have the right to choose for themselves.
Which is interesting that, I guess kind of a personal observation that a lot of the people that even though they wouldn't choose to exercise that option themselves, they still support the ability of other people to exercise that option.
Yeah, that's right, and I think that really, it's an important point. It really does point to an understanding that this is a complex and deeply personal decision.
Absolutely.
And, if you're not in her shoes, then it's very hard to judge. I think people feel like they should not judge if they're not in another person's shoes.
And are there any noticeable trends in Vermont and nationally around women who are seeking abortions? And has that gone up? Has that gone down? Is it relatively stable? Like what's the driver there?
Yeah. So abortion. The abortion rate has been steadily declining since 1981. It was at a high in 1981 of about. For women of reproductive age, it was about 22.3 abortions per 1,000 women within that age group.
Right. So that's about 2.3% of all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong data. So the high was actually 29.3 abortions per 1,000 women of childbearing age in 1981. This is according to the Centers for Disease Control. And then it declined to 12.1 per 1,000 in 2014.
So that's almost a 50% decline.
It's an incredibly, I have a chart for this that I can send to you later. But yeah, it's a pretty dramatic drop, and it is increasing. I mean, that it continues to drop. It's very unambiguous.
Are there any
steadily going
predictions?
down.
So that's been over the last 4 decades, essentially. Is there any predictions about what the next 2 or 3 decades are going to look like as contraceptives get better and awareness, both in public awareness gets better around around some of these issues?
Well, the contraception access is a really important part of this, and Roe v. Wade, it was passed in 1973, and it took a while, I think, for contraceptive care to really hit the mainstream and really hit its stride within the healthcare setting. Since it has, There have been a number of very supportive programs, including federal programs called Title X. The Obama administration with Obamacare codified in federal law that there would be that contraception is primary care, and that there should be no copay or deductible for contraception. That's an essential health care benefit. So with increases in contraceptive access, we have seen and also increases in sexuality and sex education in our schools. We've been seeing a steady decline in abortion in America.
So it's interesting, that's the stage that this whole debate is set on, is that we have a declining utilization, I guess, of abortion, even though support for reproductive rights and abortions are higher than they have ever been. So there's a couple other questions we want to kind of run through here, one of which is kind of related to the federal level. So there's a lot of pushback within the last year on federal funding for Planned Parenthood, and that wasn't necessarily direct funding. That was kind of essentially precluding, because we were talking a little bit about this earlier, precluding Medicaid dollars from going to Planned Parenthood facilities, and that was, I believe, for all procedures, whether or not it was abortion related or not. Can you speak a little bit to what that debate was nationally?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of people don't realize that Planned Parenthood doesn't have a line item in the federal budget. I mean, when people in Washington talk about defunding Planned Parenthood, they imagine that the federal taxpayers are writing Planned Parenthood a check. That's not the case, as you mentioned. So what they're trying to do is block patients who have Medicaid from going to Planned Parenthood clinics. This is the irony here is that Planned Parenthood, abortion is one of the least frequent procedures that we do. It's a very small part of what we do. It's a very important part of what we do, but we do a whole bunch of other stuff. And already, so people think, oh, it's because Planned Parenthood is going to use that money for abortions. But actually, that's not the case either, because for a very long time, there's been a prohibition on using federal dollars for abortions. So no matter who you are, no matter where you get your federal dollars, no federal dollars can actually be used for abortions. So then what it really amounts to is an attack on Planned Parenthood. And it really singles out Planned Parenthood, which is not constitutional, it's illegal. And in fact, there are hospitals and obstetricians' offices all over the country who do abortions, and they're not getting singled out to not be able to take Medicaid patients. So it really does feel like an unwarranted attack against Planned Parenthood.
It would kind of be like the federal government saying, no, our Medicaid dollars can't go to UVM Medical Center.
Yeah, it seems kind of arbitrary.
Where they're focusing on a specific provider as opposed to, which is which gets to constitutionality issues, because you can't really single out, you can't pick winners and losers.
Exactly.
So much to talk about in so little time. We got about 4 minutes on the clock here. Can you quickly summarize what Vermont's current abortion laws or that either protect or put restrictions on abortion procedures?
Sure, that's easy. I mean, we don't have any. Vermont doesn't have any law specific to restricting or permitting abortion. There was some case law. There was, before Roe, there was a doctor, before Roe, there had been a law in the books that was overturned, that was found to be, that had gotten overturned. And there's some remnants in state law from case law of things that have happened, but generally speaking, we do not have parental notification in Vermont. We don't currently have any restrictions on abortion in Vermont.
So there's nothing that protects doctors either that perform the procedures, or is that not really a concern?
It's not a concern either. That was the case law actually pre-Roe that got overturned in 1972. But yeah, there is, doctors are fully protected under the law to provide abortion care without fear of legal ramifications.
Got it. Cool. So you mentioned parental notification. That was one of the things on our list to talk about. Where does Planned Parenthood stand on parental notifications?
Yeah, I mean, we counsel minors who are pregnant, and we counsel them, we encourage them to talk to their parents, at least a parent or an adult that they trust, clergy, a mentor. But unfortunately, that's not all kids have a parent that they can talk to. I will say, though, most kids will tell one of their parents. But we just feel very strongly that there are a lot of reasons why a minor might not want to tell their parents, and that has to do with possible coercion. Maybe their parents are suffering from substance use disorder and are not clear. Maybe they're abusive. Maybe a parent was the father of the child. There are all kinds of circumstances where telling your parents and making someone tell their parents would be a bad idea. Another example is fear of telling an abusive parent that you're pregnant could cause a delay in seeking abortion care and then end up with complications later on.
Right.
It could also lead someone to seek out an illegal abortion and harm themselves in the process. So there are a lot of really compelling reasons why parental notification really is not a good idea, even though we do counsel minors, if they have someone they can talk to, that we really strongly recommend and encourage them to do so.
And something you kind of just alluded to, you really want to, if you're going to have an abortion procedure, you want to have it really as early as possible. Is that my understanding, or at least
the earlier the better?
Yeah.
For safety reasons, and in fact, most abortions now are happening very, very early.
Gotcha. All right, so we've got about a minute left. Is there anything that you really want to get across to the viewers before we move on to the next segment?
Well, I would just say that that abortion is a really important right that women have won through very hard-fought battles, and it is really fundamental to their ability to have volition, full volition over their lives. And Planned Parenthood believes that we want to just welcome everyone, all patients, to come to us. We always say nothing will freak us out. We want to make sure that people feel safe going somewhere to talk about their health care, and they can trust us.
Cool. All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next segment. We're going to have a rebuttal from Mary Beerworth, who is on the other side of this debate. And then we'll come back, and Lucy will have another 10 minutes to have a follow-up conversation. So stick with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Pat McDonald. We're back again. This is the second part of the show where we are giving our guests 10 minutes to rebut what they've heard so far. And Mary, just want to let you know you can use the 10 minutes to either rebut, make a closing statement, or both. So I'll just let you take it away, and I'll attempt to be a little quiet.
Well, feel free to ask me questions, Pat.
Oh, thanks.
So some things that struck me about what Lucy said right off the bat, is that Planned Parenthood is best known for their abortion services, and I believe that's true. And it is a fact that Planned Parenthood is the single largest provider of abortion in the state of Vermont, in the United States of America, and in the world. The abortions are us of the abortion business, and they do about a third of the abortions that are done in the country. And then they have extenuating arms that reach into third world countries and promote abortion as a method of family planning. So that's a place where people would disagree. So I know that numbers in Vermont, when you do polls, we did a poll ourselves, and we found a lot of people identifying themselves as pro-choice. But here's the important thing. They didn't identify themselves as pro-abortion.
Right.
So there's some middle ground there. They favored parental notification by 72%. And it was a hard support for notifying parents. I mean, parents are responsible when that child develops an infection, and we had that
Right.
situation in Vermont. And we had a suicidal young girl whose parents had to intervene, but had no idea that their child had suffered an abortion all alone and abandoned by her boyfriend, as usually is the case, just tanking into.
Yes, right.
So many, many scenarios. But anyway, on late-term abortions, whether a baby can feel pain, alternatives for women, informed consent beyond, here are your 3 choices, you know, keep the baby, abortion, or put the baby up for adoption.
Right.
Some real caring solutions. Those are things Vermonters are in favor of. So I want to set that record straight. Also, when it came to funding issues, Planned Parenthood of Vermont, just Vermont, which by the way has 12 clinics. Now it's Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, and in Maine there are 5 clinics, and New Hampshire has 4. But Vermont has 12.
Wow.
That's more clinics per capita than some of the largest states in the United States. They moved their West Lebanon clinic over to White River Junction after New Hampshire passed a parental notification law. So now if kids come from New Hampshire to White River Junction, their parents will not be notified because Planned Parenthood's not under an obligation to do so in Vermont. So these are some of the things that, that concern us greatly. And in fact, while the numbers have been dropping since 1985, about 3,500 abortions a year were performed in around the mid-'80s. Planned Parenthood eventually co-opted most of the other freestanding clinics, so now it's Planned Parenthood that does the abortions. Few in the hospital and a few in doctors' offices.
And that's just something, if I may interrupt, that's something new for the hospitals.
Yeah.
I just read that maybe within the last month where they've said they're doing abortions.
It's just the UVM Medical Center that has really, made a splash. There's a few been done in maybe Porter Medical, maybe up in the in St. Johnsbury, but by far and away the largest number are done at Planned Parenthood clinics. So it's important to understand that that's a big focus for them, and their political activism is on the increase while their care is on the decrease. And they're serving a fewer and fewer of Vermont's population, and there's more and more political activism. That does involve money. They are the recipients. Now, they don't get it directly, as Lucy said. They don't write a check to Planned Parenthood, but under the Title X Family Planning Program, there's an allotted amount for Vermont for the contraceptive family planning services. It's $1.5 million from the federal government annually. They grant the money to the health department, and the health department writes the check to Planned Parenthood. Then they get an additional $300,000 from the state coffers to do whatever they would like to do. The family planning money needs to stay as contraceptive services. And once upon a time, Pat, that was probably important because there were doctors who wouldn't write a prescription for the pill. Most of these things are now over the counter. We certainly have 53 federally qualified healthcare centers, thanks to our congressional delegation, that can provide more services. Keep a file on you as you go through the many stages of your life, not just 2 years they keep it and throw it out. They get your family background. That's not something when you don't have parents, when you're in a clinic accessing care. You don't have your parents' medical records, nor do you have mom or dad telling that maybe you have a risk of heart disease and stroke. Or an increased risk of breast cancer, or some of the things that these contraceptives and abortions can affect. So I would rather, myself personally, would rather see the money go to those 53 other community health care centers. But that is a funding stream that it makes Planned Parenthood able to privately fundraise for, and I'm clear, they are privately fundraising for their activities at election time. Certainly at election time, 2 years ago, they spent $450,000 to influence the outcome of the election. So it's a powerful force inside the State House and outside, not just a healthcare facility.
So could I ask you, Lucy mentioned, I wrote the notes on that back in a couple of years ago, it was 29%, or 29%, 29 out of 1,000. And now it's down to 12.1 per thousand. What do you attribute the reduction to? Because I don't think people are slowing down on personal relationships any.
And it's a real drop. I mean, the health department takes into account fertility issues, population issues, and it's a real solid drop. So at 3,500 a year back in 1985, I think I was beginning on that. That has steadily cascaded down to about 1,200 a year. I believe it's because of what the pro-life movement has done, which is a pro-life movement that's flourishing. Young people it has great appeal for young people because we're telling the truth. It's a difficult truth. Can women, do exactly what they want with their own body? Yeah. But when they're carrying another human being, unique and unrepeatable, the kids kind of hear that.
Right.
We're being asked to care about trees, we're being asked to care about animals, and it just looks like a major hypocrisy to young people that we're not focusing on this unborn child.
Really?
And they feel that. So I believe that pro-life movement, that voice of the unborn, that continue every state, some far more successful than Vermont, but we have a very dedicated and committed group of pro-lifers who understand that they may not see a big win at some day, but they're going to stand up for the unborn and speak for that little baby that can't speak for itself. And we're at fair booths, and we have people come over, and they're so happy with the pro-life message. Our message is, we're glad you were born, life is beautiful,
Right.
life is precious. Those sorts of positive, resonating themes, I think, begin for women to think, wait, I'm carrying something very valuable, and let's see what I can do to get this
Great.
baby
Well, I know
here.
you have good turnouts at your rallies.
We do.
And
We do.
Your days at the legislature.
Yep.
So-
We have a devoted
Yeah.
group of followers, and they're
Well,
not going to go home.
Yeah,
so
very passionate.
Yes,
I
they
think-
are.
I think, although I was talking to Lucy before this, probably on both sides of the
There's
issue.
passion on both sides.
on both sides.
And maybe someday we'll just come to a
But-
meeting of the minds. There are places where we can agree. And I don't know how much time I have left.
You got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, when we're in the State House, we have we sort of put people in different categories.
Yeah.
Pro-abortion can't really make any progress.
Right.
Pro-choice, lots of things we can agree on.
Yeah.
Pro-life friendly, lots of things we can agree on, and pro-lifers. So, as long as you see yourself out there as someone who can find a way to move a culture of life a little closer, it's better for women, better for their babies, and better for society.
Right.
When you don't value life.
That's great.
It's
Nick, can you
dangerous.
talk a little bit about your website as we wrap up and make
Yes,
sure that people
sure.
know how to get in touch with you?
Do look us up. vrlc.net is our website, but don't stop there. Go and search out four-dimensional ultrasound, National Geographic's video on life itself, and find out more. Everything is out there these days, and become educated. Don't get locked into, what were you saying in the beginning, sound bites and
Sound bites, yes,
cliches
that's
and
right.
things. And let's not be divided by titles like pro-choice, pro-life.
Yeah.
Let's see where we can
That's great.
find some
Mary, it's
common
been a
ground.
pleasure. Thank you very
Nice
much.
to see you too.
We're going to turn the studio over to Ben and to Lucy, and we'll wrap up the show. Thank you.
Welcome back to the final segment of our show. We've got Lucy Larish back on to talk to us, to kind of close it out and give her thoughts and closing remarks in response to the last two segments we just had. So Lucy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I guess I want to just start by saying that Mary closed by saying, talking about how labels don't help anyone, and that there's probably a way that we can work together. And I just really want to emphasize that I really agree with that. Labeling pro-choice, pro-life really doesn't help the debate. It really doesn't help us gain understanding of each other. So just on the positive side, I wanted to start out with that.
Well, everyone wants to be the pro, and the other people are the anti, right? That's how this
Right.
it's almost a perfect example of that.
It
where,
is the
like,
perfect
the
example of
vernacular
that.
changes depending on who you're
Kind
talking
of,
to. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But I also wanted to kind of correct something, or actually give a little more context to something else that Mary said. She was talking about how care is on the decrease at Planned Parenthood. What is happening very clearly in our shops is that the recommended testing for cervical cancer, for pap smears, and also for breast exams is decreasing. In other words, the frequency, the recommended frequency has gone down. So we are actually seeing, while we are seeing fewer patients for that testing, where we do the testing in larger intervals now, we are finding that our testing is becoming more and more effective. And so we are finding cancers earlier and saving lives, and we're very pleased with that.
And that was direction, if I remember this correctly, because this changed about a year and a half, 2 years
Yes.
ago, the recommended
Few years.
frequency for breast examinations
Yes.
for cancer detection. That was something, I believe, that came from, was it the National Cancer Research Institute, or was it CDC?
I think it was a cancer. Then there are actually a number of groups, and I don't actually have the names of the organizations, but they're highly respected policy, clinical organizations. And there are actually a number of them, and there's not a lot of unanimity. There's still some controversy within the frequency, how frequent breast exams should happen.
And that was around false positives. It was kind of
Yes.
there's too many false positives because they were examining too often, and then it was kind
Exactly.
of hard to determine what was real and what wasn't. I think it's kind of,
Exactly.
if I remember that conversation, yeah.
And then the recommendations for Pap smears was before the breast imaging or the breast exam discussion. So those are, the recommendations for those are pretty universal and unanimous. People, from a clinical evidence-based point of view, the jury is out and everyone is in agreement with that. So we've been following those best practices and evidence-based recommendations. And that has resulted in fewer procedures for Pap smears. So I just wanted to say that. And regarding the increase in our politics, yeah. I mean, it's not, what has happened on the federal level with the Trump administration is a full frontal attack against our organization. And we're not going to be apologetic about fighting back. And our supporters are coming out of the woodwork. They are contacting us proactively and asking us how they can support us because they really believe in our mission and they really support us. So we are seeing an uptick in volunteers and in people interested in supporting us in all kinds of ways, including fundraising. So Mary is right about that, but at the same time, I think it's really important to understand the context because it's not just abortion that's under attack, it's not just Planned Parenthood that's under attack. Right now, we have contraception is under attack. And I think you had a question for me.
Yeah, actually that rolls right into the question because I was going to ask about how changes from the Trump administration and the federal government are affecting public policy here in Vermont and in other states around the country.
Yeah.
Because clearly there's a lot of either ambiguity or mixed messages coming from the federal government.
Well, the Trump administration has been appointing professionals into the well, I use that word lightly actually, into the Human Services Agency. That's the agency that oversees funding for Title X. Mary mentioned that. That's our federal family planning program. It was designed for contraception and helping states manage and make sure that people had access to contraception. So the Title X program is being reworked. Their goals and their scoring has been rejiggered by the new installees at the Human Services Agency to emphasize abstinence only and education and natural family planning, otherwise known as the rhythm method. Nowhere in those recommendations or goals do they talk about evidence-based. Do they talk about long-acting reversible contraceptives, which have been really understood to be incredibly effective in preventing an unwanted pregnancy. So we are seeing another layer of an attack against women's reproductive rights, and it's not abortion. We're talking about something as fundamental as whether or not women will have access to contraception.
And when we talk about this, and we talked in our first segment when we spoke about this dramatic decline in the number of abortion procedures being done in the U.S.
Yes.
Isn't contraception the driving factor behind that?
Absolutely.
And so if we're trying to reduce, as a policy, I think as a policy discussion, I think most people could probably agree that fewer abortions is not a bad thing, right?
Absolutely. We absolutely agree with that.
So don't we all want to be working towards better contraception, better education, in order to avoid having to make difficult decisions like terminating a pregnancy?
Absolutely. We would be very happy if we didn't have to perform abortions. This is not, I don't think anyone is pro-abortion. This is something that is it's a necessity. It becomes a necessity, and particularly becomes even more so when contraception is denied and when access to contraception is taken away. I think that if some of these policies are truly implemented and we see them in effect from the Trump administration, if we see them go into effect for a number of years, I think we will see dramatic, we'll be going backwards with teen pregnancy and with unwanted pregnancy in general and abortions in the future.
So it's not just the EPA that's not allowed to use the words like science-based or evidence-based.
That's
It's
correct.
also the federal healthcare agencies.
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. Absolutely. Evidence-based is nowhere in that request for, the document that they send out to invite people to apply for the
And
funding.
I think that's important to know because everyone's been talking about, the EPA, all the scientists, they can't use terms that you would expect to find in academic documents.
The same is true
And the same is true
for the
healthcare.
health department. This is a very anti-science administration, and it's very concerning. But I just wanted to close with one positive piece of information, and that is that Planned Parenthood Northern New England has embarked on this project on a population-based public health level. It's called EPIC, that's Equity in Pregnancy Intention Campaign. Nationally, our unintended pregnancy rate is about 50%. It's very high. And we are working with all kinds of community and healthcare partners to gather data and to work toward public education and counseling and partnerships to see if we can build structures that will help us reduce that unintended pregnancy rate.
That seems really high. Is 50% of
National-
all pregnancies or unintended? Is that
Are
how that works?
unintended or unplanned. That
Unintended or
does not
unplanned,
mean
okay.
that they're unwanted.
Right. That's a different.
That's a different question. And
Right.
of that 50%, or 47% or 45%, depending on what segment of the population you're looking at, and
Right.
it varies. But of that percent, a large number of those are very welcome pregnancies, and those are pregnancies that are taken to term. Those might just be called surprises,
Right.
in timing, but that are welcome. So we don't want the unintended pregnancy rate necessarily to be zero, but we do want to reduce it because we do
Right.
feel like that's
So
too
if it was
high.
50% now, what was it in 1981 when there were,
Yeah, I
before
actually
we've seen
don't
this
know the
decrease?
answer to that question,
That'd be
but
interesting.
that would be interesting
Yeah.
to find out. But because I'm sure it would have been much higher.
Right. So I guess the moral, the bottom line is we're a lot better now than we were, but there's still work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Cool. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks
And
so much.
thank you guys for watching. We'll definitely be back next week. If you have comments, please feel free to leave them on our Facebook page, on our YouTube page, on our website. We'd love to hear what you guys think about the new format. This is the second show we've done in this debate style format, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But until next time, keep listening beyond the sound bites.